This video is sponsored by Squarespace. You can make your own beautiful website or online store with this all-in-one platform. Hi everyone! In this video, I wanted to talk about some different styles that I have for digital art because I've noticed that there's like two different ways that I tend to approach digital paintings, and I'm going to be showing you two different speed paints to demonstrate what I'm talking about. And I am using Procreate, and I think I am mostly using the brushes that I made that I'm still sort of working on and like taking my time to make sure that it's like a good brush pack so I can release for purchase. I'll probably have like a free brush, and then like you can get the whole pack for a price eventually. But this first painting I did back in like, was it March or something, or May, of these little badgers walking down a forest, and I would call this the first sort of style that I like to do, which is a more like painterly approach to digital art. This one I start with a very rough sketch because I usually don't go straight in without sketching, but I'll do a rough sketch and I'll usually skip the line art, and if the background is just foliage, I'll like block it in with shapes and not necessarily like draw each one with the sketch. I'll just kind of like feel it out as a painting. The areas that have more detail, like the badgers, will have more of a detailed sketch, and there might be some loose lines for the background, but for the most part I figure out everything by blocking in colors and painting, and I feel like this is a more like casual approach to doing paintings where you don't have everything planned to a T. You don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but you sort of have like an intuitive way of painting things. I added little flowers here and there. I find this a very relaxing type of style that I like to do. And I work in layers for this, but not that each element is on its own layer. I add a new layer every time I'm going to add a bunch of details. So once I reach a certain stage, I'll create a new layer and then just paint on top of everything and just kind of paint around the whole thing. I try to add details evenly across the whole painting and not zone in one area for too long, because if you overwork one area, you might that might stand out too much. So it's good to like kind of like jump around the whole painting and add little details here and there. And I think the final painting of this doesn't actually have the branches in the foreground, but I kind of like those as a framing element. It's always kind of hard to decide, like, do I want foreground elements that like cut across it and like give it some depth, or do I just want a nice little scene? And I think I just decided it to be a little bit more like calming than that. No foreground elements, more of like an open space. But if you do have those branches framing it, it can make it feel a little more cozy, so I'm not really sure. But adding all the little flowers was a lot of fun. I tried to look up real flowers to base it off of, and also just do some like general flower sketches. I'm always torn between like doing more abstract foliage and like actually basing the plants off of plants that are real. So like you could look at it and say, oh, that's a sunflower, that's a wood sorrel, that's a clover, that's this type of grass, or just like, oh, that's like a generic pink flower, that's a purple flower, but like you don't know exactly what it is. I kind of like to do a mix of the two, where some of the flowers are real and I don't know the names exactly, but like the purple ones, those are based off of real flowers. But some of the like little bushes of flowers, or like the little like specks of color, I don't know exactly what flower that would be. I just sort of use it as filler. And it's nice to do these dark green backgrounds. I just find it so cozy. It's so fun to do like a dark wooded background with little critters and flowers. It's just always such a fun thing to paint, and I have to be careful not to do it too much because I like to have some variety in my art. I think that's like my art student training kicking in, where it's like you don't want to just draw the same thing over and over, but it's okay to do the same thing more than once. I have done this type of painting a lot, where it's like woodland, grass, flowers, very, very natural with like a dark green background. So I would call this my more like relaxed painterly style, where I don't have line art. It's not like that planned out. It's just sort of like I go with the flow and see what happens. It's usually when I'm in a good drawing mood and I have the confidence of like figuring it out as I go. And there's usually a couple of main elements that I will plan, like the badgers had some more sketching and I use reference photos for them. But all the plants were very like intuitive, and I just kind of placed them around. And this usually works out to making paintings that aren't that that like refined. It's a little bit more loose and painterly, but I really like the result of that one. It's one of my favorites from this year. And this next painting is my other style. I think a couple other paintings of mine that represent this style well would be my like fennec fox, the salmon bear painting. I'll put some other examples on screen of like the line art style that I'm talking about, but basically this is when I have more of like a specific idea and I feel like doing a detailed sketch and then a line art on top of the sketch, and everything is sort of like all laid out, and I actually do detailed line art. Some paintings have more detailed line art than others. This one was like pretty detailed. Like I wanted the lines to actually like go around each shape instead of like figuring it out by painting. I think it's because this one is not a scene. It's just kind of like two dragons flying like suspended in the air, and I colored the dragons and did flowers around them. So the flowers don't really have much line art, but the dragons do. Now for a break to thank this video's sponsor, which is Squarespace. You probably know by now, but Squarespace is an online website builder. You can use your website for anything. You can use it for a shop, a blog, or even a portfolio, which is what I use mine for. You can see all my different artworks are up on my Squarespace site thanks to their portfolios and galleries feature. You just add this block to your site, you upload all of your artwork, rearrange them, and Squarespace will display them all beside each other nicely. I also really like their Fluid Engine editor, which is where you can drag and drop different elements on your site and they all sit on a grid, but you also have the flexibility of moving them around. So I think that's a really nice feature for customizing your pages. Another great thing about Squarespace is you can link to all of your different social media sites very easily. It's always good to have links to your Instagram, your YouTube, your TikTok, your shop, anything. If you like to start your own website, head to squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you want to actually launch your site, go to squarespace.com/JelArts and use my code JelArts for 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. It really helps support the channel. And this one, I wasn't sure what colors to do. I think sometimes for this style, when I do a sketch, I'll sometimes color the sketch just to get an idea of like what I want to do with the piece. So I added like a green dragon, a pink dragon, and sometimes the colors that I choose can go into the line art. So I'll like outline certain colored areas a certain way. So like if I added some like random foliage with the colored sketch, I'll like bring that into the line art layer. I don't remember if I did that with this painting exactly, but I'm still on the sketch and trying to figure out like where I want the colors at the same time as sketching, because I kind of like to have an idea of like where I'm gonna go with the painting once I actually get to the colors. And it's easier to figure that out in the sketching section, because then if you're like, oh, this area is kind of like weird when I color it, then you can change the sketch before you've actually done the lines, because it's a lot harder to change the line art than to change the sketch. And sometimes my line art is more tight, sometimes it's more loose. I don't think this one was particularly tight line art, but we'll see when we get there. And another thing with the colors for this one, I ended up doing another dark green background, because sometimes I want to do a light background, and then I'm like, well, if I did a dark background, they would just pop so much more. And it's sort of a habit of mine at this point. But for line art, I like to get a nice textured, sort of soft brush. Sometimes I'll experiment with different brushes I have and use a different one each time. It's not always the same brush. Like on my most recent fish painting, I used a softer, like chalky brush that I made, but I wasn't a huge fan of that, but I think it kind of lent itself well to the underwater style. And my line art isn't like the most detailed or anything. I just like to define the shapes, add little like hatch marks, add some texture in this stage. Because I will end up painting over my line art later, as you will see. And I also added some foliage with a sketch, and I don't remember if I did lines. But here I'm just dropping in some random colors, and I decided, okay, I'm gonna make the background dark because I think it just works really well for this piece. And I wanted the dragons to sort of be opposites. Like I wanted one to be darker and one to be lighter, and them to be slightly different colors. And as I went, I slowly like increased the saturation and the contrast, because I realized it was kind of pale at the start. Okay, I did do line art for the flowers. I think I kept restarting them because I just wanted like a certain look to the flowers. I wanted them to look more 3D. So I restarted it a bunch of times, and then I settled on a sort of flower style. I don't know if these are real flowers. I think I just sort of drew them. I might have looked at a bunch of different flower references to get the shape, but in terms of like the actual flower, like I think they might have been based off of marigolds, but they're not as like dense as marigolds, so I'm not entirely sure. I remember struggling a lot with the flower placement and the colors. Like this painting was actually kind of difficult for me to do because there were just so many different elements at play, and I think it took me a long time, which is why the speed paint is way longer than the other one, because the line art style, I usually use that when I have a very detailed piece in mind and I want to have it more controlled. So naturally, this ends up taking a lot longer. But I like to sort of do these two different styles depending on my mood and to just switch things up because I don't like doing the same thing over and over. I think a really fun part of digital art is being able to experiment and change things up so easily. If you just use like a different brush, it can make all the difference on a painting. And it's just really fun to play with how different brushes work, how they interact with each other. And yeah, digital art is really good for experimenting and all that kind of stuff. So with the line art style, I will fill in the lines. I'll add as much detail and shading as I can. I'll do some overlay layers or multiply layers or any other blending mode to sort of like capture a certain essence. And as you can see, a lot of the leaves I just carved in with a painting sort of technique, like I just blocked them in, like the badger painting, but the dragons are more detailed lines. Once I get a lot of shading and detail to the place I like it, I will create a new layer on top of everything and then I'll paint over the lines on top. This lets me sort of like blend the lines into the painting. It softens it up. I can like fix little details here and there. It allows me to not have to be too like strict and rigid when it comes to coloring in the lines. I can be a little bit more loose and then fix all of the details on top while also making it more soft and blend in. And I used a nice textured brush for the background. I don't remember if I used my own brushes for the dragon painting. I know I did for the badger one, but the dragon one was in February. I drew this in February and I don't know if I made my brushes then. I think I made my brushes after this. So in this one, I'm mostly using like Max Pack brushes and that's pretty much all I use. I like his gouache brushes a lot. And as you can see, I was playing around with the contrast a lot. I was making sure the leaves faded out into the background. I was making sure the wings were legible because that was another hard part of this painting, was making sure that like the dragon wing behind the other dragon sat back enough and that his head popped out and you could tell what was going on. I also really liked adding all the details on the dragons and giving them fur because I like drawing fuzzy dragons, like fluffy, feathery dragons, as opposed to like scaly ones because I just think it's more fun because they're sort of like flying birds. Well, birds fly, but they're sort of like dragon birds in a way. So both of these paintings I like a lot, and I think you can definitely recognize them both as my style, but they definitely have a different construction to them. And it just really depends on my mood, honestly, and like what I am painting. So I hope you enjoyed this little video showing two different process videos for the badger painting and the dragon painting, talking through my process. I do a lot of sketchbook videos here, but I know a lot of you also do digital art and you'd probably be interested in more digital art videos from me, so I try to throw one in every once in a while, but I feel like they are harder to make because there's not as much to look at. I just rely on the Procreate speed paint feature, which is like the greatest feature ever for sharing your workflow on Procreate. I really hope you enjoyed this video. You can actually get the dragon print on my shop right now. I don't think the badger print is on there yet, but it will be in the next update. And lots of other art prints that I mentioned will be on my shop as well. So I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in my next one.